Welcome to the Fort Collins Book Fest 5-year celebration. My name is Tanya Victor, and I've been with New Belgium since 2002. I'm in the sales training department and on the taste panel, and I run an internal beer education program. And I am super excited to be here with you this evening. And I'm going to share the interview that I had with Garrett Oliver, Brewmaster of Brooklyn Brewery and author of The Brewmaster's Table. So that'll be woven throughout this presentation. And before we get there, though, a little bit of a public service announcement. Today, we're celebrating the first 5 years of the Fort Collins Book Festival, a virtual celebration of books and brews, writing and riffs, food and thought, big science and great outdoors. As always, we are also celebrating the importance of literature, writing, books, and our libraries. Check out the virtual program at www.focobookfest.org. We have book talks, discussions, panels, prose and poetry readings over these 2 weekends, all free. Make sure you attend as many as you can, and please share with your family and friends. Before we get to our session, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. This festival could not happen without our generous sponsors. They make this book festival completely free. And you can check out the entire list at the end of the session. But today's event is produced by Poudre River Public Library District in partnership with CSU Morgan Library. Our presenting sponsor is City of Fort Collins Fort Fund. Further support has been provided by Friends of the Poudre Library District, Friends of Morgan Library, Liliko'i Morgan Endowment Fund, Downtown Development Authority, Liggett Johnson and Goodman PC, Front Range Community College, Downtown Fort Collins Creative District, and Old Firehouse Books. And our media partners, KUNC and 105.5, the Colorado Sound. We'd like to give a special thanks to Northern Colorado Writers for presenting all 4 of our writers' workshops. Wilbur's Beverage for our tasting beer selection today. Thank you to all of them. And thank you so much for supporting our 5th annual FOCO Book Festival. As I mentioned, Garrett Oliver is the brewmaster of the Brooklyn Brewery in New York City and one of the foremost authorities in the world on the subject of beer. He's hosted more than 700 tastings and pairing events, and he is perhaps best known for his book, The Brewmaster's Table, Discovering the Pleasures of Real Beer with Real Food. We also have Ali Schultz, sensory manager with New Belgium Quality Assurance, here today to walk us through how to taste and analyze beer. So let's get started. Throughout this, if you have questions, go ahead and post those in the comments, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. And so the suggested beers that we had, in no particular order, we have Liliko'i Kepolo from Avery in Boulder. Let's see here. We've got 90 Shilling from Odell's. And Prost Weissbier. That's a German style wheat ale. We have Voodoo Ranger IPA from New Belgium Brewing Company. And Milk Stout Nitro from Left Hand. And what did I miss? The Märzen from Brooklyn Brewery, which is an Oktoberfest. It's a lager. We'll try that at the end. And one more, Mama's Little Yella Pills from Oskar Blues. So those are the ones we have. Obviously, you can choose, anything that you'd like, or you can just watch too. That's totally fine. But these are the ones, we're not going to go through all of them because we would be drunk and it would take 2 hours. So we're going to go through the Liliko'i today with Ali. She's going to show us how to taste beer with that particular beer. Then we're going to go to Nitro Stout. We'll go to Voodoo Ranger IPA, and then we'll talk about the Märzen from Brooklyn. And the rest will be homework for you, so we'll get to that. All right, so the idea behind food and beer pairing and finding a good pairing is really, mostly it's just about fun. And there's no wrong answers. It's everybody's got a different palate, and everybody likes different foods. So if you feel like it works, then it works. So there are some rules of thumb to find harmonious pairings. And really the idea is just finding things that elevate the food, finding beers that elevate the food, and finding food that elevates the beer so that when you're enjoying it together, it comes together and creates harmonies, I guess you could say. I like to make analogies with music when it comes to food and beer pairing. It's fun. And so that's really the rule number one, is having fun. Rule number two, I say that very loosely. These are just suggestions on how to find harmonious pairings. Matching strength with strength. So this is kind of one of the most important ones. You don't want to overpower the food with the beer, and you don't want to do the opposite. You don't want to overpower the opposite of what I just said. And you're looking for complementary elements within them. So you want to know, you want to find out what really is the strength of that food, and what ingredients are used to make that food. And also with the beer, what is the style? What kind of malts? What kind of hops? What are the main flavors? What are the biggest kind of calling card, I guess, if you will, about that beer? And you want to find those complementary elements that click together and harmonize again. So you're looking for that. And the best way to discover beer's elements, obviously, is to really slow down and kind of pick it apart. And that's where Allie's going to come in. And she's going to walk us through how to taste beer in sort of the official way, and break down some of those elements so that you can really get into it and savor it, and then decide what sort of food might go really well with it. So she's going to break that down for us right now. If you want to take it away, she's going to use the Liliko'i, like I said. And so if you want to, out there in Radio Land, if you want to open up your Liliko'i Kepolo and pour it into a nice vessel, or you could just drink it out of the can. It doesn't matter, or the bottle, whichever you get. So Allie, take it away.
Thanks, Tanya. So if you do have a glass, I would recommend that. That's really the full-on beer experience. And let's be honest, most people don't drink wine out of a bottle. So you should probably, not drink your beer out of the bottle either. So get yourself a nice clean glass. Pour your beer into it. Got my Liliko'i here. It even has a sound to it. That's exciting. Okay. So tasting beer is really simple. It can be kind of overwhelming for people to start, but really there's only 5 steps to it. It's like one hand. You got this. So the first thing we're going to do, since we're staring at it, is do the visual. We're going to look at the color of the beer. And so, yes, you could say things like yellow or brown, but that's kind of boring. And it's a Friday afternoon. Let's get a little crazy. We like gemstones a lot. It's citrine or gold, or you could use flowers like daffodil or rose, depending on the color of your beer, obviously. After color, we're also going to look at how clear the beer is. So Liliko'i, you can see, it's got a haze to it. It's not clear. It has this haze, which in beers can vary from light all the way to very heavy. And this one's pretty heavy haze. If you drink a lot of hazy IPAs, you're probably fairly familiar with that as well. And then we're also going to look at the foam. I did a good job of pouring. You actually want this much head on your beer because we work really hard at a brewery to get this awesome foam in the glass to make it look really cool. And so you don't want to do this wimpy pour where you don't have any foam. You want some big, bold foam on your beer. If you didn't pour very well or it just dissipated, you can swirl your glass gently. Try not to get it in your lap. And that'll help you rouse up some more foam. And then we want to look at how much foam there is and what color it is. So like I said, I got a pretty good head on the beer. And then if I'm looking at the color, again, you could say white, but I much prefer things like unicorn back hair because that is super whimsical. And that's how you do visual, pretty simple. Now we're going to move on to aroma. And this is actually where the majority of beer flavor comes from. So this is a really good one to pay attention to. So there's 2 ways we smell. I'm going to drop a little bit of science words on you, so bear with me. I am a scientist. I can't help it. The first way we smell is called orthonasal smelling, and it's how you smell all the time. If somebody asks you to smell something, you're orthonasal smelling. So that's what you're going to do. You're going to take a big sniff of the beer. Oh, it smells lovely. Now we're going to do retronasal smelling. Again, this is something you do all the time, just like orthonasal smelling. You're going to take a sip, swallow the beer, and breathe out through your nose. And you're just encouraging those aroma molecules to reach your nose, kind of like the back door a little bit. So what are we getting from this beer? Essentially just say what you think it tastes like or smells like. So Liliko'i, and take your hints from the can too. Liliko'i literally means passion fruit in Hawaiian. So I'm going to go with it smells like passion fruit. But then it's also a wheat-based beer, which I think it also says on the can. So it has some bready notes to it, maybe even a little bit of vanilla and white wine. And some like lemon or some citrus aromas in there too. So it's a pretty fruity, fun kind of beer when you're smelling it for sure. Got to sneak in another sip. After aroma, our third category is going to be taste. So there are only 5 tastes. We have sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and umami or savory, which is a Japanese word, umami. Typically, beers are only sweet, sour, and bitter. It's very rare to get a salty or umami tasting one. So what you're going to do for taste is, darn it, you have to take another sip and think about the progression of tastes. Typically, they start off sweet, sourness is often in the middle, and they finish bitter. So go ahead and think about that as you take another sip. So this one starts off a little bit sweet, not overly so. And then it also has a nice bit of sourness to it as well to help balance that sweetness. So it's pretty well balanced, I would say, between those two. And there's not a lot of bitterness in there. This isn't really Liliko'i's jam bitterness. It's more of that fruity tartness going on in there. So that's really what you should be getting a lot of in the taste for this beer. And second to last category we're going to talk about is mouthfeel. This one's kind of tough, but it's literally, what do you feel when you put it in your mouth? So typically things we think of in this category are body. Is it light-bodied like a light lager, or is it heavy-bodied like a stout or a barley wine? Or is it somewhere in the middle of those two? The other thing we like to think about sometimes is astringency. Like if you're thinking, typically that's used a lot in wine terminology, astringent or drying. It kind of feels like puckering or wicking in your mouth. And then other things like smooth or effervescent like champagne. Some beers really, really get that going. So let's go ahead and take a sip and think about the body and astringency. So I would say it's pretty like medium, almost maybe medium full. It's a wheat beer, so it's got a lot of creaminess to it, which oats are really contributing to the beer. And it's not terribly astringent. In fact, I'm almost getting mouth watering from all the sourness that was in the taste, which is kind of fun because now it's like, oh, I really want another sip of this. And then the last category, it isn't an official part of the tasting, but it's just kind of like, how would you put this beer together in your own head? What would be your one-liner for this beer to summarize the tasting? And for me, I'd say it's like a hazy, fruity, tart explosion, something like that in my mouth, and I love it. So, and that's how you evaluate a beer. Nothing scary, just describe what you're experiencing with the beer, and the more you practice, the better you'll be at it.
Thank you, Allie. That was awesome as usual. My favorite is the unicorn back hair foam. Such a good descriptor and totally true, right? We've all seen unicorn back hair foam. Oh yeah. So now thinking about what we've kind of pulled out of the beer, let's think about the foods that we could pair it with. Some similarities. So the first thing that comes to my mind with this is not something too heavy or it's almost like it matches the color. When you look at a dark beer, you think of darker foods, or when you think of amber beer, you think of caramely foods. And with this, I'm thinking light foods. I'm thinking salads with grilled chicken, maybe, and tropical slices of tropical fruit, and maybe a vinaigrette or something. So some of those similarities of what's in the beer, trying to find them in foods that might match. And so with that said, I found today at the market something that will probably play more towards a little of the contrasting elements, which we'll get into in a minute, but also some of the similarities. So I've got a cheesecake. I don't know if you can see that. It's just lemon ricotta cheesecake. It's like sweetly, or it's an Italian dessert. Anyway, it comes in this cute little thing right here. I'm going to try this. And so whatever kind of food that you might have with you right now, go ahead and try. Again, no wrong answers, just have fun with this. I'm going to try it and see what happens. And just, and I really haven't done this yet, so I don't know what this dessert is like with this beer, but I think it might work well with some of the contrasting elements of like the fatty kind of creamy ricotta thing. And then the effervescence, it might sort of wash away that and clear my palate. And then I'm thinking the lemon maybe will work with some of the citrus notes in the beer. I don't know. I could be wrong. And then there's a graham cracker crust at the bottom that might actually pull out some of the kind of bready notes that you might have gotten, or crackery kind of thing. Okay, that works. That works for me. I wish I could send this through to everyone there, out there. That is actually really delicious. This is quite a tart dessert. And so the tartness just sort of meets together with the tartness in the beer. And it just plays really nicely. I have goosebumps. This is the kind of stuff I love to geek out on. Ollie's laughing at me right now. I know it. Okay, so I also found something I never knew existed, passion fruit in ruby chocolate from Choco Love in Boulder, I believe it is. And I thought, passion fruit, let's try it with the passion fruit beer, see what happens. Even though it's chocolate, that could be kind of weird, but let's do it anyway, right? It might be weird hearing me eat in your ear, everyone. Now that one's a little too contrasty for me. It's all over the place. But really, it's all about having fun. So just have fun with it. Just experiment. This is what it's all about. So I'm not going to keep on eating in your ear. But what I will say is that think about, and maybe write some notes, or maybe even notes in the comments. What sort of food do you think this would go with? This particular Belgian style white ale, Liliko'i Kepolo from Avery, or any kind of wheat beer that you might have, or any kind of sweet, sour fruit beer. So just give some of that some thought and have fun with that. So I am thinking also that this would go really well with like pork, grilled chicken. I already mentioned that. And you're looking for those complementary elements and also contrasting, which I will talk, like I said, I will talk a little bit more about that. I'm also thinking like shrimp, like grilled shrimp would be really good with this. Even maybe ceviche, I don't know. But the fun part is just finding what works for you. That's the fun. All right, so let's go to Garrett's clip. So I asked him a question, and it was, which of your beers do you most love to pair with food, and why? So Doug, if you don't mind playing that, that'd be great.
This is an interesting question. I mean, we had, we're not producing in the United States right now. It may come back. But we had a beer called Sriracha, which was based on the Sriracha hop variety, which was originally from Japan. And Sriracha has this very unusual aroma to it. It smells kind of like lemongrass, lemon verbena, and dill, which is one reason why when they grew it first in the 1970s, nobody wanted it, because it was being brewed for Japanese lagers. And Sapporo, who were the people who first grew it, they couldn't find a use for it, in their beers. Cut to about 10 years ago, it was released in the United States, and I started brewing with it. And what we did was a saison, very dry, and with this kind of like lemongrass, herbal, dill character, but within the classical structure, of a beer like Saison Dupont. And so that's been over the years my favorite beer to pair, just because it can do really unusual things. And one thing I can tell you, and I think I mentioned it in Brewmaster's Table, is the toughest pairing that makes even wine people go and hide is pasta, straight marinara sauce, no cheese. Yeah. I mean, absolutely devilish. It has, people don't realize really that the tomato is a fruit. It is a highly acidic fruit, and it also has plenty of sugar. And something with a lot of sugar and a lot of acid, I talk to sommeliers and they say, well, I'll recommend a rosé and then try to hide for the rest of the evening. Like it's really tough. Sriracha just went sailing right in there, like no problem. It was all great with sushi, great over here, great over there, great with salmon, great with, and just do so many different things. And so, I refer to a beer having talents, like a person. What can this beer do? And it's almost the way that I wrote Brewmaster's Table is flavor is something that happens over time. It's like action writing, in a way. And I describe the beer as having talents, and I find that beer was particularly talented, and being designed to some extent, in some ways, after another talented beer, which is Saison Dupont, which, as I wrote in the book, just can do so many things.
So as you can see, he's a pretty smart dude and has a lot of passion for food and beer pairing, and obviously knows his stuff. And he has a quote in his book that I really liked, having to do with like what this should be all about and how you can find these pairings. He said, when we're matching beer and food, the most important thing we're looking for is balance. We want the beer and food to engage in a lively dance, not a football tackle. I like that one. In order to achieve the balance we seek, we need to think about the sensory impact of both the beer and its prospective food partner. Impact referring to the weight and intensity of the food on the palate. So that is a way more eloquent way of saying basically what we were getting at before. And next we're going to try the Milk Stout Nitro from Left Hand. And this is going to be an interesting one because with these Nitro beers, you're supposed to pour them very vigorously upside down right away. And I'm hoping this won't explode. So let's see what happens. This is how they told me to do it. Oh my God, it's working. All right. So right away, when you're looking at this beer, take a look. Or any stout or porter that you might have. This is the Milk Stout, obviously. And it's super dark. You cannot see light through that. The foam is super tan. So some of those elements that you might already be thinking are, you're going to smell, you already sort of have a clue by looking at it. So give it a smell, kind of do what Allie suggested. Drive by, we call that the drive by, yeah? Some of the elements that we're getting there. What do you think, Allie?
It's one of my favorites. I'm a sucker for stouts. Yeah, lots of chocolate, coffee, roasted, all of the things like you said that it looks like. That's what it smells like.
Nutty, and obviously very malt forward. So tons of malt there. And there's a lingering bitterness too that kind of balances out the sweetness. It's not too sweet. This is quite delicious as well. So if you think about this, what is its main strength? We just kind of brought that out. So I'm thinking chocolate. And so this is a flourless chocolate cake that is delicious. This is just an excuse to eat dessert.
You're making me so hungry, Tanya.
I know. And by the way, I was going to say in the beginning, every time I say dessert, you have to take a drink. And by the end, you will have a substantial buzz because I have a slight obsession with desserts in general and dessert with beer. So let's give it a try. Your chocolate with your stout. And you can do it in whatever order you want. Wow. Strangely makes the beer seem very refreshing, which you normally wouldn't think, but it's that contrasting thing again. So that contrasting element that is, and the carbonation, the alcohol and slight bitterness are going to wash away some of that rich, fatty chocolate. So it's a nice complement. And there's some, obviously, so there's some contrasts and there's some complements. And so there can be many of these rules kind of working at the same time in tandem when you're doing these pairings, which is the most fun when there's like a multi-layered thing going on. So go have fun with that. I mean, it's not just chocolate things that this works with, but discover, maybe even, I don't know, barbecued pork or something like that. So let's go to the next clip, which would be the question I asked Garrett was, what is one of the best or worst pairings that you have ever found in your time? And what made it work or not? And thoughts on wine versus beer in pairing with food. This one is really fun. So Doug, can you roll that clip number 2, please?
Well, the funny thing is that one of the best pairings I ever found was entirely the result of a mix-up of an error. So this is a funny story. So I'm on stage at this kind of food festival thing where people are coming out one by one and they're doing presentations. And if I remember, the person ahead of me, she was doing oyster pairings with champagne or something. And, the crowd is in front, they're oohing and eyeing. And I had left instructions for one of 2 pairings. Either we were going to do Stilton with barley wine. Our barley wine at the time was called Monster, and a very nice pairing. Or black chocolate stout, Brooklyn black chocolate stout, which is imperial stout with chocolate truffles. And I had arranged this with our salesperson to send it there. I'm backstage, I'm opening our packages. I'm about to go on in like 7 or 8 minutes. And what do I have but Stilton and black chocolate stout, which were not the 2 things that were supposed to go together. If we had black chocolate stout, we were supposed to have chocolate truffles, not Stilton. And I'm sitting there by myself, I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, like, what am I gonna do? And I tasted the Stilton together with the black chocolate stout, and it just went boom, And what it did, I mean, I know Stilton cheese very well. I won't call myself a cheese expert, but I know a lot about cheese. And I know, like, if you ask me out Stilton, I can tell you all the best producers, all this stuff. But I did not realize that in the center of Stilton, there was this massive chocolate character, which the beer essentially releases. And you don't really recognize it. Maybe if somebody told you in advance, when you tasted the cheese, you taste it. But the same way that a lot of people don't think of pineapples when they think of Parmesan, when you have Parmigiano Reggiano and you talk to cheese experts, pineapple is the number one, tasting note. Well, it's the same with Stilton and chocolate. So the chocolatey character, which is coming from roasted malt, and the Stilton got together, the sweetness versus all of that salt, and the whole thing was just like, so I came up on stage and I smile at everybody and say, hello, everybody, we have a great new taste sensation for you today. Imperial stout and Stilton cheese. And like nobody in the audience knew, everybody oohed and ahhed over it. And nobody knew that that was not the pairing that was supposed to show up that day. So, you learn something all the time, and in doing wine versus beer with cheese, I've done this a lot over the years, and increasingly kind of as a charity event, you'll have the winemaker come in or whatever else. And I've done wine versus beer with cheese or wine versus beer with food in front of as many as 300 or 400 people, in a lighthearted competition style. So I will tell you this, I love wine. I know a lot about wine. I drink a lot of wine. Most of my friends are in the wine business. But when you do wine versus food with cheese, wine versus food versus beer, there are really 2 kinds of sommeliers. The type that know they're going to lose and the kind that don't know they're going to lose. I actually find the ones that don't know they're going to lose to be the most fun because they expect to win. And basically, I come, and I don't want to sound so much like it's a battle, but they come like with one thing, this beautiful thing. It's a grape, nice ingredient you got there, grape. I like grape. But then I just go, oh, look, I have everything. I can spice it, I can smoke it. It can taste like chocolate, it can taste like bananas. It could be sour, it could be bitter. It could be basically anything. You can't win. It's not even a fair contest, really. I mean, it really kind of isn't. Because beer is a culinary product. It's a culinary product. It starts with a recipe and an idea in the mind of the brewer. This is the opposite of what wine traditionally is, which is an agricultural thing. You're expressing terroir, and yes, the winemaker has an influence, but hopefully they are not manipulating things to the extent that, you know, they are completely creating the wine. You know, the nearest analog to a brewer is a chef, not a winemaker. And so what that means is that as we make beers that increasingly taste like everything, that means that from a culinary point of view, we can do everything. Now, there are areas where I feel like wine can have an upper hand. You know, large amounts of residual sweetness. Okay, we do not have really in the beer world, there are a few, but there are not that many beers that are going to bring the residual sugar, say, of a Sauterne. You know, if you really want to do that, say, versus a cheese or something like that, that's that sweet, there are not many things. But really, other than that, you know, we can do pretty much everything, and then so much, another 80% of stuff, which means that beer is really the ultimate culinary drink. And I can say that without fear of successful contradiction, because I've never been successfully contradicted.
All right. So the next beer that we can try is Voodoo Ranger IPA, or any IPA or something similar to that. So open that up and pour it into a nice clean glass. And you want to get a little head on that, just like Allie says. You kind of, at the end, you sort of vigorously pour that so that it creates a little bit of, usually it's about an inch or so. It's a little bit more than that, but that'll work. All right, so give it a little swirl. Cover the top, trap those volatile aroma compounds, and see what we've got there.
Your panelist is showing, Tanya.
Yeah. Using some of Allie's language. Okay. Those hop aromas, they are there. They are beautiful. And then take a sip. Thinking about what stands out the most about the beer. And with IPAs, I think we know what that might be. The hops and the smooth bitterness. That's what I'm going to say. But obviously, there's a little bit of malt to kind of carry it through. And sometimes the aroma can be anything from like apricot, green tea, grass. Allie, help me out here. I'm having a moment.
Tropical. We get a lot of pineapple.
Tropical. Grapefruit. That was what I was looking for.
Grapefruit.
Citrus, grapefruit. So thinking about those main flavors, start jotting down some ideas about what you might think what food would go with it. There is a proven winner here. Doesn't mean you have to like it.
Is it a dessert, Tanya?
It is a dessert. I like dessert. Take a drink or two. So this is carrot cake. And this is kind of one of those, like I said, proven winners that a lot of people say is just a great match. And part of the reason why is you've got the alcohol, the bitterness, the carbonation. In the dessert, you've got a lot of contrasting elements here. You have the kind of rich and fatty, sweet frosting. You've got the cake, which is a little bit spicy. Hops are a spice, technically, I guess. And then you've got a little nuttiness on top. It depends on the carrot cake, who made the carrot cake, what are the ingredients, all that. But generally speaking, carrot cake, because of that, is quite a nice pairing. So let's take a look and see how that goes, if anybody has it. Or just try any food. See how it works. You know, this was just an excuse so that I could eat lots of desserts. I'm going to vote a yes. I don't know. What do you think?
I don't have any right now, but from what I recall, yes.
I wish I could share it with you. I really feel like it makes the beer extremely refreshing. And then you're ready for another bite. And then when you take a bite, you're like, I really want to have that sensation again. And I want to take another sip. So it is kind of like that ping pong game. It's super fun. So my favorite element is when you find a food pairing is the contrasting piece. I tend to gravitate towards that. So, all right. So I am thinking that we can move on to just some real quick other rules of thumb to help kind of, find some different pairings, but super quick so that we can get on to the next clip, which is about the writing of the book, which is kind of a really great clip. So think about regional and traditional foods. So things that are already kind of established. You're thinking IPA and pizza. It's sort of an American classic, or Brussels and Belgium, goose with mussels, things like that. Excuse me. Consider the cooking techniques as well, and what season it is. So are you grilling, and the caramelized kind of marks on the grill, the grilled meat or whatever. If you're a vegetarian, well, you can do that with whatever, your vegetables, that sort of thing. Salads and different seasons as far as what you tend to want to eat during those seasons. So consider that, and also familiarity pairings, which I won't get too deep into, but if you have kind of proven flavors that people like a PB&J, there's a reason why people eat that together. You've got your sweet, your tart, and then you got your peanut butter that's nutty and fatty and rich and salty. And those are the contrasting elements. But sometimes you can pull those apart and choose a beer to replace one of those elements. So that's another kind of pairing idea that you can use and implement to create a great harmonizing pairing. These are the hazards of having beer while you're trying to talk. All right, so let's go to clip number 3. This is Garrett. I asked him, what inspired you to write Brewmaster's Table? What inspires you in general? And what do you find beautiful and fascinating about beer? And what's the most fun part of the research and writing process? Doug, you can roll that clip.
Well, the thing that really inspired me to write Brewmaster's Table, and this is something that not many people know, and if you live in Colorado, you wouldn't really have a reason to know, is that at Brooklyn Brewery, we were entirely responsible for the establishment of the craft beer market in New York City. Back in 1994, 95, even when you could find what were then semi-exotic beers like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, you could easily find them in Boston. You couldn't find anything in New York City. The city was so large and so unruly that every brand was scared of it, and nobody wanted to come here. And as a result, people like Sierra Nevada, like Chimay, like everybody basically would come to New York, and nobody would take them from a distribution point of view. We were doing our own distribution, and breweries started to ask us, would you carry us as well? And at first we said, this is a very strange business model. Why would we do that? But eventually, by the time we sold off our distributorship, we were carrying over 200 labels. We were the biggest Sierra Nevada distributorship outside of Northern California, all the Trappist beers, all the Lambics, everything. So basically, if it wasn't Sam Adams or Guinness, within the general craft or craft-like universe, then we were selling it, which meant that across the street from the brewery in our warehouse, I essentially had a candy store of all the best stuff from around the world. And I was doing dinners and things around these beers. I just realized, if people just spent like a couple of minutes a day, 1 minute a day, 30 seconds a day, thinking about putting their beer together with their food, their lives would become slightly better. It's not going to change your entire life, but everybody eats dinner every day, and they have a choice between an alcoholic drink or a soft drink. These are really the only two kinds. Water I'm going to put as a soft drink. I don't want water with dinner. I also don't want Coca-Cola or milk with dinner. So personally, as an adult, I'm probably going to choose an alcoholic beverage most of the time. And beer is the most wonderful one for pairing. So, the beer started to become available, but nobody seemed to be putting 2 and 2 together. And when you put 2 and 2 together in this context, 2 and 2 equals 7, which I thought, it's like, wow, this is kind of like a magic trick. And so I thought this would be a great way, especially during that period, back in the early 2000s, you had the rise of the celebrity chef. Everybody started to become more and more interested in food. People were really respecting the food world. They were respecting wine partially because it worked so well with food. And I said, you know, if we hitched beer to this food popularity, we would probably start to gain the same kind of respect the food is gaining. You know, people at the time didn't necessarily respect craft beer. Remember, it was 17 years ago, but they respected food, and they saw the two things work together. They'd be like, well, that stuff must be pretty good if it can do this. And so that was really the idea behind it, that, you know, if people read this book, they would have slightly better lives. And let's face it, there are not many new things to like every day. You know, you don't find, to me, discovering craft beer and the way it works with food is exactly like discovering jazz. Someday, on some particular day, somebody played you your first Coltrane record. And, you know, if you come to love jazz, on that day, a little door opened up. And on the other side of that door is a better life. It's a small moment, but it's a really big deal. And I have seen that over the years, you know, Brewmaster's Table has provided that moment for a lot of people, and that really means a lot to me. The thing that was really strangest about writing the writing style for Brewmaster's Table is I really had to develop an almost new style, at least for me, of writing. My original idea was that I had done so many beer reviews for publications like All About Beer and places like that, that I would basically be able to recycle these reviews because I had so many tasting notes. It's like, oh, well, I've written half the book already, right? Well, if you ever sat in front of a blank page, you kind of come to realize, and I think many people have had this realization, the stuff that you actually know, that's absolutely true, that you totally know and can write down, fills about 30 pages, not 200 pages. And secondly, you know, the writing style that I was doing for a magazine was not the writing style that fit here. So I had to develop a new style. And you had writers like Michael Jackson who were so amazingly good that I stayed completely away from reading any of his stuff while I was writing my stuff because it was depressing. It was so good that you could not possibly write as well as he did on the same subject. But I developed a style of writing which was, as I was saying earlier, more or less action-oriented. You know, the beer came in this way, it did this, it went to the right, it zagged to the left, and it rode out on a rail, and it really describes beer as it actually happens, and food as it actually happens, which is not a static thing that happens over the course of a flash. It plays out over 10 or 15 seconds. You know, you do have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it's a story. And so, you know, I was almost writing it like it was a sports play. You know, okay, he's, you know, hits, he's running to first base, slides, he's safe. And that kind of developed action, if you like, in something, a type of writing that can be dead on the page. I feel like I made, or at least was trying to make come alive and sound like real life and feel like real life. And I think that that's part of the reason why the book remains relevant and people enjoy the book today, is that it's not really a book that's written specifically for beer geeks. You know, I'm glad that beer geeks love it, but I wanted to be able to talk to people who are ordinary people who heard that craft beer was good and didn't know anything at all, and start just from, you know, absolutely nothing about beer. And by the end of the book, they would be more informed than 95%, you know, of the people in the country. And, you know, I think that if I went back today and tried to write that book, I think that it's better. I think I'm a better writer than I was then, but I was better for that book back in those days. You know, there's a voice that you have, you know, when you were younger, that has its own thing to it. And people say, oh, you should, you know, you should rewrite it for like modern times. I'm like, no. It's not that I'm like less enthusiastic. You know, I probably like rethink things in a certain way. It's like, no, these things are still true, and I like the way that I put them.
So we got a question we'll answer from the audience on the Facebook feed. What do you think is the future of craft brewing? Are there trends on the horizon? Allie, why don't you start us out with some of that? That's a big question with a lot of, yeah.
That is, so if I knew what the future was, I would never need to worry about my job. So I think COVID's really thrown a wrench into things. A lot of people are drinking a lot more now. So that's all to the good for craft beer. So I think that continues to do well, even with competitors like hard seltzer and cocktails. In terms of trends, I think that we continue to see IPAs just crush it, but they're less bitter and more like, I'm not a huge bitter person. They're more like everybody's IPA kind of thing. And they've got a lot of fruitiness to them. And we see that fruitiness, not just in IPAs, but in all sorts of beers. I mean, Liliko'i is a perfect example. It's fruity, but it's a wheat beer. And you see that reflected in things like seltzers too, which are very fruity. So I think that fruit trend just continues to dominate. Of course, light beers are always really popular. They're a go-to at really any season. If you just want something light to throw back and not really have to, worry about having a few after work. So those are kind of the big trends I see, but definitely don't quote me on that.
Right? Things change quickly around here.
Definitely.
In this crazy world. Well, the next beer we're going to try is Brooklyn Brewery Oktoberfest, which is the Märzen Lager. And so if you do have that, go ahead and crack that open and pour that. Get yourself a good head on there. There you go. And let's do the old quick sensory analysis. Definitely malt forward. Little sweetness, a balance of bitterness, and a little lingering of both, but more the bitterness maybe. Some, I think, breadiness and kind of like a sweet bread almost a little bit. So this beer, I had some with dinner last night. It was the most random dinner I've ever had, but I had it with this. It just was really nice with food. And to be honest, by itself, it wasn't the go-to kind of beer that I would have, but with my dinner, and which was all kinds of different flavors, it was actually quite nice. There is a quote in the book about these types of beers that Garrett has here. It says, Märzen is terrific with ham, even with ham that's glazed, honeyed, or peppered. Baked ham with homemade macaroni and cheese will absolutely light up. Keep note of that. I think that's what I'm having for dinner tomorrow night. You'll forget that any other beverage even exists when you taste this combination. So there's some homework I'd like to try. So I feel like this would go with a lot of different things because it is sort of, medium bodied, and it doesn't have anything that's so powerful and wouldn't overtake a lot, but could stand up to a lot of different foods. All right. So with the rest of the beers, we don't want to get you wasted. So there's probably 3 beers left, at least in your selection, if you bought them from Wilbur's or collected a 6-pack. So your homework is either tonight or another night, no pressure, is go in your fridge, go in your cupboards, find some things that you think will work after analyzing the beer and pulling the elements out. And of course, think about the food too, and see what those contrasting elements would be, what the complementary elements would be. Obviously have fun and make sure the strength of both sort of meet together to create harmony. So that's sort of the homework with that. And we have some questions, but what I want to do is get through to Garrett's last, I guess it's just a couple-minute clip in the Defense of Pleasure. I love this one. I want to get to this. And then after that, we could probably answer another question or two. So Doug, if you don't mind running clip number 4 on the Defense of Pleasure. Rare.
There's a great, phrase, and this sounds weird to American ears. We don't realize how, somewhat puritanical we are. but it's a phrase that the slow food movement, which I was, very involved with some years back, used regularly. And that is, the defense of pleasure. We live very busy lives, even now. And we all, if you ask people, what are the best moments you ever had in your entire life? At more than 50% of them were probably around a table. But even though we will say that, we will still spend hours and hours and hours watching television, and then spend almost no time thinking about the table, trying to spend time at the table with the people that we can spend time there with. And it's like, well, if this is the value, if you know that these are the best moments in your life, why are you not spending more time there with the people that you want to spend the time with? Wouldn't you like to have more better moments in your life? And, if this is one of the best places in your life, why not just make it better? It's a pretty simple way to be a little bit happier every day. And if I can make dinner every day 15% better than it otherwise would have been for the average price of a few dollars, that's brilliant. Like, what else can anybody really do for you over the course of a book? We're not saving people's lives or anything like that, but I do believe that as brewers, we make people's lives a little bit better every day. And the book is just kind of part of trying to do that. Something brand new to like. When was the last time you found something brand new to like? So if we can do that, I'm like, okay, good. I've done my part.
All right. That'll get you set for your Friday evening. What do you think? Okay, so we have another question from the audience. Does the type of glass that you drink a beer in make a difference? And I'm going to say, yes, it does. And I think the reason, there's a scientific part of this that I'll let Allie handle, but when you pour a beer into a shaker glass, which we're really just used to those shaker pints, they were never intended to be drinking devices. They were to put on top of a shaker to shake a cocktail. So we're drinking beer out of these things that are not designed to lead those aroma compounds into your nose properly and to really show off the beer. So it's pretty funny that we adopted that. But I think that we're getting somewhere. There's so many different kinds of glassware if you go to different beer bars and things like that. And New Belgium we have our kind of signature glass here, and all Belgian breweries also have a specific glass style and shape designed just for them. And their beer in Belgium is only supposed to be served in those. And really it's about holding that headspace, and all of the aroma compounds are kind of pushed up into your nose. And that's where you're going to get those aromas. And Allie, if you want to add to that, because that was the super unscientific version to why the glassware is different.
I actually have a Belgian one. This is a Delirium Tremens. And you can see it's slightly flared out at the top, and that can also help support the foam on the beer. And you typically see traditional beers put in traditional glassware, like Pilsners, and those very large, skinny cylinder. Yeah, you have one that your water is in. But those are traditional as well, to help support different features of that beer. Kind of along with that is actually what proper beer service is, which I know is something Garrett talks about in his book. And how do you serve beer? What's appropriate? I already talked about the fact that you should really pour it into a glass. Just do it. It's fine. Rinse your glass out or get a new one if you're switching to a different beer. Don't just pour it into the same one. You wouldn't put dessert on your dinner plate. Hopefully not, maybe.
What are you saying, dessert?
I deserve that every meal.
I would do that.
I think the other thing is too, considering the temperature at which you drink beer, it makes a difference. So lagers drink real crisp and cold, but typically the very rough rule of thumb is the darker the beer, the warmer you drink it. So something like this, I have the Nitro Stout. You want to drink that fairly warmer. Same thing with Belgian beers, because especially those ones, you're going to get more aromas as they warm up, and they'll be more pleasant to drink, and you'll get a lot more out of it. And you have anything to add, Tanya?
I think you covered it. That's great. And it's just a lot sexier, really. I mean, think about it.
I
Not to
mean,
be weird, but
than drinking from a bottle.
right, it's sexy that you can really see the color, you can experience it better. Like if you're just drinking out of a can, you don't have any idea what that beer looks like. You just taste it. You don't even really smell it. So it really opens it up and makes it an experience. So I highly recommend a glass, and an appropriate glass too. Yeah. So we are coming to the end of our session, and I think we are going to give it a wrap here. So I want to thank Garrett Oliver for his great insight, and Allie for her skills and smarts, of which she has many, and everyone out there participating. Thank you so much for dialing in. This is so fun. Well, welcome you into my living room and into Allie's. I don't know where you are, but it's pretty funny these days how we've really kind of made this whole thing personal. So it's fun. And of course, we want to thank our sponsors. If you would like to purchase Garrett's book, just go to www.oldfirehousebooks.com/bookfest 2020. Book plates are available for select authors, and please indicate in the comments section of your order if you're interested in a signed copy. And by the way, Garrett's going to be giving a presentation, a food and beer pairing presentation for GABF next weekend. And I think the tickets are like $20 for all the different sessions. So it's a great deal. And there's tons of different, there's a lot of food and beer pairing ones, which I cannot wait to see for sure. So that's a little plug for that. And finally, please go to www.focobookfest.org and fill out the survey. We rely on our community to guide us in the future of the book festival. Have a great weekend, and see you guys later. Thanks, Allie. Thanks, everyone.